John and I would like to welcome all the participants who have logged in. We're going to give a minute or two to let all the attendees to log in, and we will get started very quickly. Okay, but a warm welcome to all of you. Hope all of you are able to see this title screen, right? How to make your OKR program an amazing success. A couple of housekeeping announcements, and I'll probably make that again. Right. So this session is going to be structured in 3 parts. For the first 20 minutes, that's going to be a presentation on the topic, how to make your OKR program an amazing success. And that's going to be followed by a Q&A with John Simon, who's here, probably about 35 minutes, 35 to 40 minutes on Q&A. And audience is free to log in your questions. You can start sharing your questions right away, right, in the Q&A section of this particular webinar. And we will answer questions, after the presentation session is over, right? So we'll try to make it as interactive as possible, but please do type your questions. And even if you are not able to address all the questions during the session, we will try to reach to you back, over email, right, with the answers. Yeah. Okay, great. So, folks, let's get started. A warm welcome again to all of you who have joined here. Right, we have people, all over the world who have joined. Right, so good afternoon and good morning, good evening, wherever you are. So let me start with introducing our speaker, right? Speakers. The first speaker, obviously, is John Simon. John Simon is the head of People Analytics and Strategy with Ericsson North America. He's based out of North Texas. And I've known John for a couple of years now, right? And he comes across, he's somebody who is very well experienced in multiple strategy execution frameworks, including OKRs, right? So you can talk about balanced scorecard, you can talk about Hoshin Kanri or OKRs, a very well experienced person and who is very passionate about OKRs and has been implementing OKRs in Ericsson, for the last few years, and he knows the entire history, right? Not only that, even before Ericsson, he has tremendous experience with strategy execution, specifically also in the technology area of analytics and business intelligence with companies like Freescale, Semiconductor, and Innovation, just to name a few. Right? He has more than 20 years of experience in this area, and we are very happy to have him here join us. Right? Thanks, John.
Thank you.
A quick self-introduction. My name is Senthil Rajagopalan. I'm the President and COO of Profit.co. I have roughly about 25 years of experience in technology and management. And for the last several years, I've been leading OKR coaching and consulting engagements with customers, enterprise, mid-cap, startups, all types of companies. And we have also chronicled our experiences and best practices that we have gathered through a series of books, right? And I'm one of the co-authors along with our CEO, Bastian Gerard. Right? I'm also a certified Agile coach, right? So before we start the session, maybe a quick introduction about Profit.co. Profit.co is a Silicon Valley-based B2B SaaS provider for strategy, execution, and performance software, right? So while we started off with OKRs, we can also represent your strategy through a balanced scorecard or any of the other frameworks, the strategy module. We can help you with your day-to-day management of tasks with our task module. We also play very nicely in the enterprise. We integrate with 60+ enterprise software tools. And for people who would like to take OKRs as one of the inputs or just want to use for performance management, we have a pretty strong employee performance management module as well. And employee engagement is really part and parcel of any OKR process, right? And we have been in the business for 5+ years, been featured in multiple Gartner and Forrester and IDC reports, primarily based on the strength of our customer success, right? So with that quick introduction, let's quickly jump into the topic, right? I'm sure most of the folks here are familiar with OKRs, but I'll probably try to provide a quick a 30-second introduction, to OKRs, right? So what are OKRs? OKRs expands as objectives and key results, right? So objectives are qualitative goals, right? And typically they are very inspiring qualitative goals that you would like to achieve, right? So in this visual, right, maybe you're trying to climb up Mount Everest or Mount Denali, based on where you are. And that's a very inspiring qualitative goal, right? So that would be probably an objective. And key results, maybe you are on a 10-day expedition, right? And the altitude that you're climbing, right? That would be the metric or key result that will indicate how you are doing against your objective of climbing Mount Everest or Mount Denali, right? A little more formal expansion that we've given in our books is that OKR is a goal management and execution system. Right? That's how it differentiates itself from a lot of other systems like SMART goals or even a balanced scorecard, in the sense that it is very easy to use, and you can use it for execution till the lowest level, right? And it's typically used by teams to collaborate and achieve stretch goals, and through a framework that requires regular check-ins, feedback, learning, collaboration, and problem solving, right? So that's the formal definition of OKRs. We are assuming that most of you here know about OKRs, right? So we will jump straight to the next topic, right? Before we talk to you about what are the best practices of achieving amazing success with OKRs, right? Maybe a quick word on why our customers are using OKRs. We have 500 plus customers. We did a survey of our top 100 customers to understand why people are using OKRs. And these are the top 10 reasons we have found out why people are using OKRs, right? Probably the most popular ones are that people are using OKRs to bridge the strategy execution gap. It's quite well documented that more than 2/3 of strategies fail due to poor execution, right? So that's a pretty important reason why people are using OKRs. And for the last couple of years, I do keep hearing a lot from our customers who want to do more with less, which means aligning the different parts of your organization to execute in tandem, right? So that's become very, very important. So ensuring alignment and capturing cross-functional dependencies are super important. And some of the other reasons could be tracking your goals better, right? Maybe achieving more moonshots and aspirational goals, executing like Silicon Valley or blitzscaling yourself and achieving things rapidly. Overall, becoming much more agile. And as you reach a certain level of maturity with your OKR implementation, you are looking forward to building a high-performing team, right? Which can take any challenge and go ahead and achieve. And as we all know, changes at that level and cultural level are really going to take multiple cycles and are going to take multiple time. Right? The lowest hanging fruit, though, if you are implementing OKRs and if you have a good tool, would be improved visibility. Right? For a lot of our customers, the first aha moment is that they say that as soon as we implement OKRs, we've got all the OKRs of the departments and obviously the company OKRs. For the first time, I'm able to see the goals of different parts of the organization and how my goals actually are going to be affected by the rest of the organization, are going to have an impact on the rest of the organization. Right? Now, let's take one example, right, of what do we mean by amazing success, right? I won't go very deep into a case study, but without naming a customer, one of our customers, used OKRs, for solving their supply chain related challenges, right? So all of us know the last couple of years, supply chain has been a pretty huge issue, right? Along with COVID and all over the world, right? So this customer used OKRs for transforming their sourcing and supply chain, right? So, but without going into details, the results they achieved, right, were phenomenal, right? They had absolutely smashed all their production and shipping goals. They had a 50% surge in demand, which they were able to meet. Before they had 5% OKR adoption when they first started. They ended up with 95% OKR adoption. Now they are in the 14th quarter. They have established an OKR center of excellence, right? And at least in that part of the organization, they strongly believe they've created a high-performing team, right? And how did this impact financially, right? So these were the financial results. this is the stock price of, a particular company, and this is their stock price of their major competitor. And obviously, they've been doing extremely well, right? So supply chain constitutes about 65 to 70% of the costs, right? So they were able to absolutely execute very well. They have a huge, a very good culture. A lot of the points that I'm going to mention right now after this, they did all of this and more, and hence they achieved huge success, right? So for achieving this type of a huge success, right, what are the prerequisites that we need to have, right? So I would say, that if you are, let's say, obviously software is something which, you might have, but there are going to be a lot of other things which are going to be super important, right? You need to have a great OKR process, right? You need to have coaching, right? The managers, need to be able to coach their team members. If required, please pull in an external coach, right? Obviously to support your execution. Executive commitment is going to be super important. We're going to expand on that. You need to have clearly defined roles, right? You need to have an OKR captain, departmental champions, and probably one of the most important things would be having the check-in discipline, right? A lot of times people get very enthusiastic during the planning phase, but having the discipline for doing regular check-ins and also for executive reviews to happen based on the check-ins, right? So those are all, super important things, right? And obviously having a great employee engagement program is really going to help, right? So if you do all of this, and you may start initially even without a software, that's fine. But let's say a couple of quarters later, to scale up, you may want to add a software along with this. That's going to result in absolutely great alignment and great execution. And we have seen this. Whatever we are talking today is really based on the successes that we have seen in a lot of customers. And in a few cases where they couldn't succeed, we could trace back them, right, to many of these things, right? So to expand on this a little bit, right? Obviously, when we say executive commitment, we are referring to great communication, constant communication. First, starting with the why, right? Why we are doing OKRs, right? That has to be communicated, and the executives need to be seen to publicly support the OKR program, right? Which means rewarding people who are taking stretch goals and putting together tremendous effort to achieve them. They may or may not achieve the result, right? And most importantly, making sure that the executives should review, right, the progress of the OKRs regularly, right, based on the check-in stuff, right? So if I would say the North Star metric for a successful OKR program would be if these two things are happening, right? If reviews based on check-ins are happening regularly, right, maybe 80%, 90% of the time, then your OKR program is likely to be in good health, right? So if there's going to be just one takeaway from my 20-minute presentation, it's this, right? So regular reviews based on check-ins by executives, if it's happening, then your OKR program is likely to be successful, right? Now, obviously, there are quite a few other things that could be done, right? You are expected to have a good mix of stretch goals versus committed goals, ideally label them, whether it's a stretch or committed, so that everybody's on the same page, right? And employee adoption, right? Obviously, winning over the employees right from the beginning, motivating them as to why we are doing it through great communication, and probably setting up the mechanisms to reward people, and probably rebuke those who are not able to, who are not exactly adopting. Right? All of that is going to go a long way, right, with helping you to do it. Right? And there are some resistance to change, and it could be there, right? And we do see that, and great change management will absolutely help you, right, to overcome that. The last couple of things, right? One, there is some element of OKR expertise is required and recommended, and that's the reason having taking the help of an OKR coach could help, right? Where how to define high quality OKRs, how to define which are outcome based, have a good mix of lead and lag indicators, right? How do we structure an OKR calendar, right? So that the habit of OKRs really start developing. All of those are important, right? So there's an OKR expertise which is involved. But as you keep doing quarter after quarter, we have seen that for many customers, by the third quarter, fourth quarter, this becomes OKRs become a muscle memory, organizational muscle memory, right? And management bandwidth, right? Sometimes people might say that, hey, I'm already very busy and I don't have time for this additional, let's say, program, right? So the answer should be very simple. OKRs are never an additional program, right? They are really part of your core work. In fact, they help you to provide focus to your core work and execute your core work better, right? So when it comes to executive communication, right, what do we mean by that, right? So executive communication should happen in all the stages of an OKR quarter, right? At least for the first few quarters. And we divide an OKR quarter as 4 phases: plan, execute, engage, and learn, right? So during the planning phase, a good announcement by the executive sponsor that, hey, this is happening, this is pretty important, why we are doing it. We have seen leaders do it over town hall meetings, virtual town hall meetings, recorded videos, emails, a combination of that. And we do provide templates, for executive sponsors to do that. That's pretty important. They are able to communicate and connect the strategy, and they also participate in creating very good company level OKRs, right? So those are the 2 initially very, very important things which they do. Right? Obviously, they will. It's important for the executive sponsor to note, stretch OKRs, appreciate the folks who are taking it, send out emails, and obviously many of this can be automated, with the personal touch of the CEO's communication style or the executive sponsor's communication style. Right? All of that can be done, right? And similarly, during every other phase, right? If you're doing the planning during the first week of the quarter, you'll be doing execution, for the remaining 12 weeks, right? So the importance of check-ins, making sure celebrations happen, right, throughout the quarter, right? Maybe setting aside at least once in a month or twice a quarter type of celebrations, and the executive sponsor sending an email or holding an event, town hall event, and making sure that the people who are taking the extra effort, receive the recognition. Right? That goes in a long way to improve employee engagement, right? So all of this is absolutely important. And finally, by the end of the quarter, it's highly recommended to have a true reflect session. And during this session, people who have taken, people who have done very well in terms of experiments that they have done, who have shared their learning, and awards should be given, right, for those folks. Right? And there are a lot of ways we recommend for executive communication to happen. Right? It could be, and we will help with templates and overall customizing for specific organizations. Right? So moving on, there are on the roles and responsibilities. Right? So there are a few roles and responsibilities which are very important to make your OKR program successful. Right? So if you start with, let's say, a 50 or less type of number of people, then right, having a good OKR captain is going to be critical. Right? An OKR captain should be a program owner who runs the OKR calendar, right? Makes sure that the train is running on time. People are checking in on time. Obviously, with a good software, you should be able to see a dashboard of how the different departments are doing, whether the check-ins are happening on time, right? Whether the execution is happening as planned. So the OKR captain is the overall program owner, right? And the OKR captain typically reports to the executive sponsor, and the executive sponsor's role, we have detailed, previously, so I'm not going to go over it again. But so even if you have a very small, let's say, pilot implementation, clearly defined these 2 roles are critical. But as you go, let's say, over 100 people, right, having a good departmental champion is important too, right? So maybe product, engineering, marketing, sales, each department should have their own department champion, and that person becomes a local expert, both in OKRs as well as on the product, right? So they help to validate the departmental OKRs, make sure check-ins from their teams are happening. And this person doesn't have to be the department head. This could be somebody who's at the second or maybe third level, somebody who's very enthusiastic, connects well with people, that would be the personality of the person who would be a departmental champion, right? Obviously, ready to learn, ready to share, all of that is important. And the department heads can play the role of a department executive sponsor. So that's important. So there are different profiles of people, right? People can come, for the OKR captain, they can come from chief of staff, program management, COO office, from HR, right? It doesn't matter, right? These are some sample profiles from our customers, people who have done pretty well. And similarly, the executive sponsor is not always the CEO, right? If you're a very large company, right, it could be a functional head, right? Like these are again our sample profiles from our actual customers. And in all these cases, these are companies which are at least $2 billion in size and above. So a functional head or a group head or an operation head, is quite big enough, right? And probably the last one on this is, what is the amount of time that people need to spend, right? In the first couple of quarters at least, the OKR captain should plan to spend at least 30 to 50% of their time, right, on the OKR program, right? For the executive sponsor and the OKR champions, I would say it's probably 5 to 10%. And if it's a very large program where you have 1,000 plus people or 500 plus people, we would recommend having an executive assistant for the OKR captain, right, to help with scale up. Okay. So, and please, as I said before, right, we will answer your questions. When John begins his, we'll do a Q&A with John, and we will start that in 5 minutes or less. And to conclude, I wanted to share, what are the top 6 things that you should be doing to make your OKR program a huge success, right? In addition to the things which we just mentioned, right? We mentioned about the importance of executive sponsorship. We mentioned about the roles and responsibilities, right? But once you start planning, there are 6 things that you should do to make sure your OKR program is a huge success. Number 1, make sure that your planning cycle is complete by week 1. And this should be in the steady state, right? And if you're doing OKRs for the first time, you may take 3 weeks, 4 weeks of the quarter to do it, which is absolutely fine. But once you hit steady state, planning should be completed by week 1. And planning means writing OKRs at every level, company level, department level, team level, and completing the alignment, right? That should be done. The OKR calendar should be locked in by week 1. And by calendar, we mean, the department huddles, the check-in schedules, the OKR company level meetings, learning meetings, celebration meetings, end of the quarter, reflect, reset. All of that should be locked in, and people should be locked into their meeting calendar, right? Check-ins and reviews should happen on time, right? At least, I would say 80% on time in the first quarter. That's important. Employee engagement, we've already talked about it. Celebrating the wins and rewarding employees for efforts at various stages, every stage goes a long way with positive reinforcement, right? And ensuring that continuous learning happens throughout, right, is absolutely important. We have a lot of very good content on our website on each of these areas, right? I'm not going very deep into it, but having a good learning management tool, rewarding the people who are continuously learning and sharing their learning, all of that would go a long way. And finally, doing a great on-time reflect and reset, right, is going to be of a huge help. Okay. So that is going to go a long way in making your program successful. So having said this, all right, so just to sum up, we spoke about the importance of executive sponsorship, right? Starting with the why, executive communication, employee adoption. We talked about the OKR expertise required, and we talked about the bandwidth required by the management and leadership team. And we also saw the roles and responsibilities that should be ideally be defined. Plus, as you get the program on, what are the top 6 things to do, right, to make your program a huge success, right? So with that, let's move on to the session 2, right, which is really the Q&A. So I welcome John to this webinar, right? So how are you doing, John, today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for that great overview.
Excellent. Excellent. So thank you very much for joining today, John. So let's go over a few questions, and I think I see that the questions from audience are also rolling in. So let's first start with this, right? John, can you share a defining moment in your career, right, when you realized the power of OKRs in strategy execution?
Yeah, I would say the defining moment in my career was back in 2019. I was the project manager for our North America strategy execution event. We bring in the top 250 leaders all over United States and Canada. And I was building the proposal for the CEO of North America. And then he mentioned we should use OKRs. And I just nodded my head like I knew what OKRs were. I had no idea I didn't even know what the acronym stood for. And I was familiar with a lot of different goal management systems that I'd experienced with previously. So I did what I thought was best, and I went and bought the book, Measure What Matters, to learn about OKRs. And I knew this is exactly what we needed to do. I wanted to see the same impact that companies like Intel and Google with YouTube were seeing from their OKRs. And it evolved every year at Ericsson and in Ericsson North America since then. And it's had a positive impact on both customer and employee experience.
John, from a strategic standpoint, how do OKRs tie into the broader business goals, and what role does technology play, right, in that alignment?
Okay. So even though we started using OKRs in North America a few years back, we didn't have company-wide OKRs until last year. That was always my end goal. And we started with our program in North America. But by having it now at the Ericsson level, it tells all 100,000 employees what matters most, just like the companies that made OKRs popular. Now, regarding technology, you must start somewhere. So we initially leveraged a low-cost prototype. I'm sure everybody's heard of Excel and PowerPoint, which I don't recommend, but I knew it wasn't scalable and we weren't getting the full benefits of OKRs. So we explored enterprise OKR software solutions. Profit.co was selected, and we quickly saw the benefits of alignment and visibility in year one. And that was both from a top down and bottoms up, which is invaluable.
Great. That's great. Excellent. Thank you very much, John. So, John, in your experience, what separates a successful OKR program, from the one that falls short?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna share, like you shared so much great insight previously. So I'm gonna maybe bring up something different, and that is, or something to add to it. And that is, you must start with a strong OKR playbook for your company that clearly communicates the benefits and guiding principles. So we took a playbook out of Google's playbook. So that's one thing that's nice. You can actually go search for it. It should probably still be public. And we started with that. But let me just share some of the benefits. So one of the benefits that we put into our playbook, and it comes from Measure What Matters, and that is commitment to achieving the targets for OKRs with employees speaking up and holding each other accountable. And then we align that with a guiding principle. So that would be key results must be measurable with the right combination of value and activity base. We need a results-focused culture, not one focused only on initiatives. So if we complete all the initiatives and no value is generated, that is not success. So again, I would just reiterate, start with a playbook. There's lots of good resources out there to get you started.
That's great. So John, I'm going to pivot a bit and take a couple of audience questions, right? So there's a very interesting question by Ashley, right? Ashley Dietrich. How do you recommend tying OKRs to bonuses, raises, and promotions? Right? Do you recommend that?
Okay.
Yes or no? Why? Yeah.
Yeah, and Senthil, you might want to add in here too. And so, Ashley, I don't know if you saw, but I have a new role. So I used to be a head of like business performance, and that's when I was doing this for all of Ericsson North America. But I'm now in the people team, or HR. So your question really hits home, and this is something that's highly debated, not just at Ericsson but everywhere. And that is one of our guiding principles, and not everybody's following this, is that you should decouple compensation to create a culture where aspirational goals are common. So if you create an OKR that's tied to, let's just say, revenue, right? Then what is your, what's your salespeople going to do at your company? Are they going to set an aspirational goal, or are they going to set a goal that they know they can hit that's achievable? My guess, it would probably be the latter. So that's just straight compensation. But I think your question goes a little bit further than that into like bonuses, raises, and promotions. So we do keep OKRs separate from performance management goals, but you will see a little bit of integration. And so, for example, I would just say with my team, like my team, we have a goal that focuses on supporting strategy execution. And so there's different things that they can do to support that. And it's both the how and the what. So if they just crush it and knock it out of the park, it definitely will impact raises and promotions and things like that. But again, the bonuses, that's one of the ones that we would probably decouple if possible from OKRs.
That's a great response. Absolutely. Just to add to what John said, the reason why you decouple both is to make sure people don't let's say take goals or people are not, let's say, comfortable with stretch goals, right? We have always seen that happening, and people don't take stretch goals if you're tied too close, right? So that's probably the top reason. There are a few other reasons, but keep them separate. But what we have also seen is that maybe after a company reaches a certain level of comfort, maybe 4 quarters, 6 quarters, right? It has reached a certain level of comfort. After that, OKRs I'm seeing in practice where people take that, HR takes that as one of the inputs, not as the only input, but one of the inputs, primarily to help with continuous performance, right? Okay.
So I was going to add one more thing. This is one of my favorite topics that she just brought up. Go look at what YouTube did with one of their key results or objectives that was very popular, and it was written about and measure what matters. They wanted to have 1 billion hours of YouTube videos watched, 1 billion hours per day, right? And we all know that that's going to create revenue, right? That's going to create ad revenue. But the way that they designed the key result, it decoupled it for it. Indirectly, we know it was going to impact their revenue, but the way they did it, the whole company could rally around that 1 billion hours of YouTube videos watched per day. Like, great question, Ashley.
Sure, thanks. And one more audience question before we move back to our questions is that Eric, I think Eric Imri, he has a very interesting question. And John, this I think ties in very well because you're familiar with quite a few other frameworks and methodologies. His question is, why do you believe in OKRs versus previous similar methodologies, example KPIs, right?
Yeah, and I know Eric. Hey, Eric, I hope you're doing well. So this one here, I've done a lot of research on this, and there's a lot that you can go search, and it'll compare OKRs to KPIs, OKRs to SMART, OKRs to 40X, OKRs to 10X, you name it. And I think one thing that makes this very different is it's the transparency. OKRs should be public. So everyone in Ericsson should be able to see what my OKRs are. That's very different than I think like SMART goals, which are typically private. And I think the other one is the ability to quickly cascade and align, both bottoms up and tops down. That's the one thing that if you see like goal frameworks or the systems, when they get the top goals, the amount of time it takes for that to be cascaded and also going back up, it's very time consuming with other goal management systems. But with OKRs, it can be very quick, especially if you have more than 50% of your OKRs being aligned or what I would call bottoms up.
Great. Thanks, John. So John, we'll come back to the audience questions in a bit. And folks, I see quite a few very good questions. So please keep your questions coming. We'll come back to that in a moment. Now, John, in your experience, what are the key features an ideal OKR software should possess to make the program a huge success?
Okay. So there's several features, so I'll cover some of them. So I think the most important feature when selecting OKR software is how easy it is to cascade and align OKR. So just back to Eric's question, it's just so important. The second one, and again, it's going to reiterate what I said to Eric, it's the feature is transparency. So Profit has both the capability, right, of making it completely transparent or making things private. But what I would recommend is make it transparent as possible. Try to make as few as necessary as private. Maybe like R&D might need to be a little bit more private, but for the most part, try to be transparent with 100%. The other thing I would say, I got my notes here. I would go with the third most important feature, the ability to track both progress and status. So this was really important for me. So progress is going to be based on your current state versus the plan. So you can, every day you can see if you're making progress. Where status, it's based on your forward-looking confidence. Are you on track to hit that end goal? So I think the combination of having those two and being able to quickly analyze, it's just so valuable. And then lastly, I would say you must have the ability to check in and provide what was accomplished since the last check-in, what will be accomplished before the next check-in, and what, if any, are the challenges and impediments. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But I think those are probably, I think I listed out 4. Those are 4 software features that you definitely should be must-haves on your list.
That's fantastic, John. And John, here is an interesting thing, right? Your next question has also been asked by an audience member, right? So the next question I have is, what, in your opinion, what is the secret sauce, for building a high-performing OKR team? And I see, Tamila Hill has asked a similar question. In your experience as a leader, how are OKRs used to drive the culture of an organization, right? So maybe 2 very related things.
And thanks, Tamila, for the question. So the secret sauce. So Senthil had an acronym on his slide. He said CFR, right? So CFR, this is what gives OKRs their human voice. That stands for conversations, feedback, and recognition. So the way, my opinion on this is, on good teams, the manager or leaders hold the teams accountable. On great teams, they hold each other accountable. And that's what CFR will enable you to do. So we have a month, this is just my unit. We have a monthly 3-hour OKR review. It's highly recommended to come to these reviews with no PowerPoints. We leverage profit.co to do the updates. And then we spend the remaining of the time brainstorming how to get the key results with warning or off track to on track. That's our main purpose of this meeting. And we will hold each other accountable. We'll provide constructive, specific, and fair feedback. But my favorite part is recognizing people for what my CEO would say, crushing their key results. So for example, in our last meeting, I think it was last week, a team walked into a standing ovation from the leadership team. We were so proud of what they accomplished. Several shared their appreciation, and it's important to do what we did. We provided leading recognition. They're not done yet. We gave them the recognition before they're done. And so that's going to just motivate them to keep going after and just keep crushing this key result even more. So don't wait till it's completed. But I definitely think CFR and the way that we do it here at Ericsson, I think that's the secret sauce.
Yeah, talk about positive reinforcement. That's amazing. Right? And Tamila, just to add to that, maybe 1 or 2 other points. One, we have always found, a good reflect sessions, right, and good sharing sessions or learning sessions, if they are factored into your OKR methodology, right? If they happen, twice a quarter or once a month, where people come talk about, the experiments they've taken up, what has worked, and talk freely about failures, right? So you need to provide a psychological safety for people to be able to talk about their failures. And if you're able to do all of that, then obviously the culture of the organization is going to change, right, towards a performance-oriented, risk-taking, and very transparent culture, right? And the example which I gave with our own customer, I would say the culture, is probably one of the very, very important reasons, right? So that was a great question.
Yeah.
So moving on, John, what are the most common mistakes you see organizations making, when they're implementing OKRs?
Okay. So in our playbook, we actually had list out 6 common mistakes, but I think I'll share the 3 most common that I've experienced. So first is, and it's going to go back, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but limiting transparency. Transparency enables alignment and accountability. I can't reiterate this any more than I already have. You must make your OKRs transparent. A second is key results being subjective and not measurable. It should be effortless to see the progress and whether it has been achieved or not. And then third, I would go back to this one that we've kind of touched on a little bit, but you can't have timid OKRs. The way that we would say it is make the unimaginable possible. Aspirational OKRs will require more than your available resources. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But I would say those are probably the 3 most common mistakes that I've witnessed in my career.
That's very insightful, John. Thanks. And John, how do you inspire your team to set audacious goals, right, or audacious OKRs that drive real innovation? And we know Ericsson is all about innovation, and you're always pushing the bar. But how do you internally do it?
Yeah. So there's no easy button for this one. This one you're probably going to all struggle with, because I'm going to go back, bringing up what Eric Emery, that the other goal methodologies and why I think there's some gaps there. So let's just talk about SMART goals. So most people are familiar with SMART goals. And what does the A stand for? Achievable, right? So we've been taught when you're setting your SMART goals, they got to be achievable, right? So you're not going to set aspirational SMART goals. You want them to be achievable. But with OKRs, you can have both committed and aspirational goals. The committed ones are basically the achievable ones. You got to hit 100%. But with aspirational, if you hit 80% of your target, you probably need to be patting people on the back, recognizing them. It could lead to promotions, like Ashley mentioned earlier. I mean, that's important. So the mindset and culture must change. Most people want their goals to be green or on track. If everything is green, we are not pushing ourselves to be great or innovative. I know it's going to sound weird, but I actually like it when I see some yellow and some red and things that are off track. Then I know we're truly pushing the limits.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic response. And John, can you elaborate on the most expected or maybe unexpected or unconventional outcomes that you have witnessed in your history, right, of implementing OKRs?
Yeah, we had one Senthil that we set earlier in the year, and we talked about it at our strategy execution event. And everyone was saying, this is more than aspirational. We'll never achieve it. Like I couldn't count how many people spoke up and said, we're not going to achieve it. Well, I'm so proud of the team that took it. They more than doubled the aspirational target, more than doubled. And I think by the end of the year, they'll triple it. They just came out with this innovative gamification app to increase participation and getting, I mean, it's just amazing that they're just not stopping. And that was one thing I was worried about. What happens when they hit that target early? Were they just going to stop? But they didn't. They had this unstoppable drive to just continue to crush that key result. And like I mentioned, I think they're going to triple it by the end of the year. Just amazing.
That's quite inspiring. John, we will pivot to a couple of customer questions, right? A couple of audience questions.
Yeah.
And we have an interesting question by Nihal Shah, right? He's saying, John, did you have some teams or departments excelling and others not so? How did you manage this?
Some teams excelling and others not so. How do you manage this? Wow, that's one I'm going to have to think about for a second. But yes, the first part of your answer is just definitely yes. I think this is not a sprint, right? This is a marathon, and it's taken us multiple years to get to a point where I'm like, wow, this is now a very robust program, but we still have gaps. We still have teams that are struggling. So no, what we have to do is we just have to continually educate We have web-based training on OKRs in our playbook, but we have to keep communicating and we have to keep helping them and providing support, showing them what good looks like and what great looks like, and how teams are using CFR. Remember the secret sauce. But it requires a lot of change management with those teams that might be struggling. And just remember, a lot of people are so used to other goal management systems, and this one will contradict a lot of those. And so it's going to take again, a lot of change management to get buy-in and to see the type of results we're seeing across all teams. But great question, a difficult one.
Sure.
And
Thanks,
Senthil,
Tim.
maybe you have something to add to that one.
Yeah, I think it goes back to, I would say, some of the points that we have mentioned. Right, we have seen that again, having the right OKR captain and good executive sponsor, right, is super important. And the example that I gave before, that absolutely they crushed it, right, exactly with that. And in some cases, during the middle of your OKR program, if you have to change, let's say, your departmental champions or executive sponsors, if you have to do that at the department level, some course corrections have to be done. Obviously, that's a role of the leadership, right? So we are now, going to a very related next question, John, which is, what is the role of leadership in cascading OKRs effectively throughout a company?
Yeah, I don't know if it's possible to have a successful OKR program without buy-in from the top. We're fortunate because the CEO of North America is 100% bought into OKRs. He's very involved with the Ericsson OKRs, which are cascaded down to our market areas. From there, it's very easy to align, but the change management comes in when distributing and assigning like the owners. But again, you have to have the top level buy-in, and I think that's one thing I've been really fortunate about is, I mean, I don't think there's a meeting that doesn't go by that he's not mentioning OKRs, and that's really what you gotta have. Senthil, do you
Great.
have any other thing to add to that?
No, I think you put it in a very
Okay.
perfect way. So absolutely right.
Okay.
Now, a couple of related questions, which I think Thomas has laid out here in the Q&A, right? So his question is, he's a strategic advisor. So as a strategic advisor promoting OKR management tool for securing strategy execution, I often recommend that OKRs are initially introduced and used by executives and VP level, right, or top management level, meaning that, ensuring that only top management is familiar and experienced in using OKRs before implementing it deeper into the organization, right? So his question is that a sound approach, or is he being too careful, right? Starting just OKRs at the executive levels and then, cascading it down gradually, right? That's his question. Is it okay?
Okay, I'm going to just reread his question real quick as it's
Sure.
promoting OKR management for security. So, securing strategy action. I have to recommend introduce and use by meaning ensure that top management is familiar and experienced before. I've never really thought about this before, but it's not the approach we took. So maybe Senthil, you might have some additional insights, but
sure,
for
I
us,
can answer that.
it was so important for us to have more of the bottoms up alignment than just having it at the top. But I'm going to probably turn this one over to you.
Sure. And, folks, I think this is a very important question. A lot of times, people ask, right? And our answer to that is, OKR is not a reporting tool, right? OKR is a strategy execution tool, right? So your strategy is going to be executed by people who are on the ground, right? And it's important that you scale up quickly, right, to that level. We have seen different types of approaches, exactly the approach, Thomas, which we have done. And I would say if somebody has 10 levels, they would say that we will do L1, L2, L3 for Q1. And the purpose is primarily for the top executives to learn, understand, and practice OKRs well enough so that they can actually, I would say, work with, their team members, educate them, help them adopt, right? So for that purpose, it is okay. But for seeing success, seeing the dramatic success, like what our client achieved, And if you want to do, it's pretty important that you scale it up to the people at the ground level, right? And we have seen people who have scaled it up to several hundreds, thousands, right, in 3 to 4 quarters, right? And if you have a good process, if you have somebody guiding you to do that, and a good tool, it's absolutely possible to do that. We have multiple customers, where several hundreds, thousands of people have scaled up within a couple of quarters, right? So it's absolutely possible. And obviously, this also dependent upon the culture of your organization, right? So we have to be very sensitive, to the culture. And we've worked, let's say, with European customers, and if it happens to be the summer quarter, right, for a couple of months, people may be going on and off to holidays, right, and vacations. So, maybe we should time it at a particular quarter where it's very comfortable for everyone, and scale it up in an appropriate way, right? So that's my answer. Now, Thomas also has another question, right? He says that, downstream, I see OKRs being 100% beneficial in areas like people and culture, R&D, marketing, sales, but rarely in areas where development or project-based kind of work is not the key driver, right? So his question is, are you familiar, or should I be better at pushing for OKR setting? I'm not very sure about the last part, but yeah.
I wonder what teams, maybe Thomas, could you type in one more question and just provide a specific example of areas
Sure.
that aren't using development or project-based kind of work?
Yeah. So Thomas, maybe you can explain that a little bit, but we will come back to it. So John, going back.
I just wanted to quickly touch on a question I saw above, though, with Ken. He said he's got a small company of 25, one department as small as 2. Can OKR scale this small? I'm pretty sure, you can check me on my numbers, but I'm pretty sure Google implemented OKRs when they had fewer than 50 employees. So maybe, Ken, maybe you're going to be the next Google.
That's absolutely right. And Google implemented when they were 40 people or less. And their CEO wrote in the forward that he wished he knew about OKRs even earlier than that, right? He wished he had implemented earlier than that. And that's a brilliant response, right? Thanks a lot, John. So, John, moving on to a few other questions, right? We have talked about success, but let's explore challenges, right? In your implementation in Ericsson, what are the challenges that you encountered, and how did the software itself help you with the execution?
Yeah. So the most difficult part of the pre-adoption of the OKR software was everyone was an OKR expert building their tools in Excel and PowerPoint. I remember this one unit, about 60 people, they built this Excel OKR tool with macros, and they did all kinds of fancy stuff. The problem is we couldn't get consensus to leverage one tool or methodology, to that matter. So the OKR software reinforced our OKR playbook, and it had all the features we needed to get the buy-in, all of them. So there was pushback at first, but I don't hear any more complaints. We implemented this more than a year ago. It's been over 2 years, actually, I believe. Senthil, you could correct me if I'm wrong there, or about 2 years ago. Yes. But I don't hear any complaints anymore. It's easy to use. It's simple. It gives you everything you need from an insight perspective. And it's much easier than doing this in PowerPoint and Excel. I promise you that.
That's great. And John, the business environment today is rapidly changing, right? In that context, how do you ensure the OKRs remain relevant and are adaptable? What do you do?
Yeah, so I think one thing you can always think about, it's going to be probably a little bit challenging, but quarterly versus annual OKRs, like that's one thing that I'm starting to implement more, especially in my department. But I always tell people, don't be afraid to pivot. I tell everyone that OKR should be written in pencil. If you're executing something and it's no longer what matters most, then put it in backlog. We did this recently. We had an OKR, it was a quarterly OKR, and it was dependent on a software functionality being implemented in a different part of the business, and they had a delay. And so our OKR was no longer relevant. So I said, put it in the backlog. I showed them how to move the key result into the backlog, into profit. And I said, when it becomes relevant, we'll pull it back in. And then they pivoted it and focused on something else that mattered the most at that time. So yeah, you're gonna have times that you need to pivot, you need to change, you need to just remove it, altogether. And don't be afraid to do that. Just remember, OKR should be written in pencil.
Good. Thanks, John. That's helpful. And John, probably, it'll be great if you can share an OKR which you have used, in your professional life that you're particularly proud of, and probably the backstory behind it. Yeah.
Oh, in my professional life. Oh, you got me. I had one. I'm gonna have to come back to you on this. You should have gave me this one ahead of time, but I had one, and it was funny because when we were learning about OKRs, I actually sent it to our CEO, and I think it was something about from the strategy execution event, like what was my OKR, like what was I gonna take away from it? And I sent it to him to say, here's my objective, and here's how I'm gonna measure my commitment to him. That what I was going to do after the event. But that was kind of my own personal one. I shared it with him. I don't think I ever shared it with anyone else, but I don't remember exactly what my key results were. But if I do, I'll try to speak up for the audience.
Sure. I think that's pretty interesting. Now, probably we will take one more audience question before we wrap this up. Right, we are almost by the end of the hour. Right. So that's a question which you may want to say, which Edward has asked. Right, Edward is asking, how do you map, let's say, calculating the ROI of an OKR program? Right, is it something which you have done, or do you have any specific advice on the costs associated with an OKR program, and how do you ensure that there is enough ROI for the program? Any thoughts on that?
So I would say this is not something that I have personally done, like the investment and the hours, but there's probably some best practices that Senthil will share with you. But I would say if this truly is focus on what matters most, I think the cost, return on investment is still critical, right? But I think the cost, that's something that I just really haven't put a focus on. Like this is something we have we call it the business triangle, where we have our performance management focusing on, business as usual and keeping the business running. And this is really to transform the business, right? So that's a good question. And it's something that, I'm going to have to go back to my leadership to see how we can, what their thoughts are on that. But Senthil, do you have any thoughts of how to measure the cost of these programs other than resources and hours?
Yeah. I think I'll tell you there are different approaches how customers are practically looking at this. Right. One is that hey, this is really something which is core to the business. Right. This is really about strategy execution. Right. And regardless of whether we use OKRs or any other methodology, right, strategy execution is something which is really going to happen. Right. And if you really look at the costs, right, whether it is the software or any of the associated costs, that's not a huge cost, right? The real cost is, your people and the executive time, right, that goes into the program, right? Because you are taking your time to draft high quality goals. People are doing check-in, people are doing reviews, right? That's where the cost, right, of your time is. And what we have found is that in many cases, people really compare, the plan versus achievement, right? What was there before an OKR program and after an OKR program, and almost always they find a significant improvement. And the other interesting thing is that a lot of times people may not even have cascaded the goals, right, to a lower levels, like what they are doing for, when they have an OKR. And so that's why when you're doing an OKRs, probably you're doing a lot of things for the first time because you are in a very structured way putting together goals at various levels. Right? So, John, we are by the end of the hour. Probably the last question. We're going to wrap it up. So, John, if you could offer one last piece of advice to our audience about implementing OKRs, what would that be?
I would. I had some thoughts on this, so I'm gonna just say that, the one thing that I regret was not moving to an enterprise software solution sooner. Okay. I think there's one thing that I would have changed. I would have pushed for that a lot sooner, because I felt like we went a couple years where we weren't getting the full benefits. And I think that slowed down the adoption a little bit, where if I would have had the software sooner, I think this would be adopted by even a much larger population of Ericsson than it is right now. And it's pretty large right now, but it's not 100%. But I think we'd probably have 100% of Ericsson adoption right now if we would have moved to it sooner.
Great. So, folks, that brings us to the end of the session, and I really wanted to thank all of you, for the wonderful questions and and very enthusiastic participation. And obviously, would like to thank John for his very insightful responses based on his experiences at Ericsson and elsewhere. And to conclude, just wanted to share with you that we will definitely answer the other questions that you have been asked, which we were not able to answer. And also wanted to share that Profit.co offers a series of coaching programs, for people who are looking forward to expanding their knowledge on OKRs at different levels, including OKR program for champions, OKR program for product managers who are doing OKRs for product and engineering. And please feel free to reach out to any of our members. Right. So, having said that, thank you very much, John.